Hello and welcome to season 5, episode 3 of Dualistic Unity. I am riding the wave. It's not always necessarily the most fun ride that feels the most amazing, but having any overlaid expectations of what the wave looks like or what it should feel like or what it should sound like or be like will only hinder your ability to keep riding it. And so mitigating those expectations is always helpful. And just taking things for what they are. And remembering that my idea of how things should be is more or less fucking irrelevant to how they are. And so just continuing to ride it in that state of uncertainty is sometimes the best thing you can possibly do.
In fact, it is the best thing that you can possibly do. As with anything in life, if you don't get involved with it, it's unlikely you're really going to learn anything about it. You can learn concepts, you can learn a little bit of theory, but until you're out there actually practicing it and applying it, it really doesn't settle in to any helpful degree. And so you have to dive in. You have to feel the currents. You have to understand the water if you're ever going to learn how to surf. You have to be involved. So don't overthink it. Get involved. Let your intelligence inform itself just through the context that you're exposing yourself to. And the rest kind of takes care of itself. You don't have to be judging your progress. Wow. It's hard to believe that we are on episode 3 of season 5. That just blows me away. It's crazy. Like, we have so many group discussions now. We have such a large community of people. I think we're currently over 13,000 audience members somewhere amongst the 200 or so episodes of Dualistic Unity that do exist right now. That's incredibly exciting. If you're listening, hi, glad you're here. Glad you're a part of the community. And on that note, this episode actually involves one of the members of our community who has joined us on a call-in show and has been there for a couple of Discord chats. He's always offering something insightful, and I believe he wanted to talk to us today about debunking the quote-unquote spiritual journey, which is always something that gets me excited. And so I'm going to pass this over to him. Tristin, if you don't mind, tell everybody a little bit about yourself, how you found Dualistic Unity, what your interest is here, and then take it away from there.
All right, awesome. Well, I'm Tristin, and I actually got into this pretty recently. I'd say like a year or so ago. I first stumbled across Andrew's content on Instagram. I was like, wow, this guy has some pretty interesting stuff to say. And I was contemplating watching the podcast for a couple weeks. And then I was like, you know what? I'll just do it. So then I binged the first 2 seasons for like 2 weeks nonstop. Every time I got a break, I was like, Dualistic Unity. Dualistic Unity, and so many layers were peeling back, especially because I was microdosing, and it just like helped open me up further, and I was more open to those insights, and just it was mind boggling. But before that, I was on my own quote unquote spiritual journey. I had been in some mental ruts and had experienced quite a bit of suffering in my life. So I didn't know what everything was all about, what the purpose was. And I felt like I was up against a wall till I realized, well, I put myself against this wall and the wall isn't even there. I did that to me. So peeling those layers back has really been a journey. I'd say like maybe 5, 6 year journey. And then only being in touch with Dualistic Unity for a year has peeled back all of those layers, all of those concepts. Of course, there's still more to that onion, but it'll keep going. And I'm just happy to be here. It's been amazing participating in the chats and just being able to connect with Ray and Andrew and the whole community, because everyone has something to share.
Well said. Well said. First of all, I appreciate you checking out season 2. A lot of people skip over that one for some reason. It's kind of funny. They're like season 1, and it's like, I want to catch up. So I appreciate you, because there's a lot of good shit in season 2. It really is a building on top of season 1. So yeah, and we cover a lot of stuff that people then skip over. They come with questions, and we're like, dude, did you ever check out season 2? Because we can see it. We can see the analytics. We see the dip in season 2. So anyway, it's my little rant on season 2. But I resonate with you a ton, man. I mean, it's so interesting how you can be sort of involved in the quote unquote spiritual conversation, and it in a sense it's just any other belief system masked as something that sounds a little bit better. And so it is still, though, believing in something, and there's always that underlying kind of belief that like there's a spot, there's a place that you get to, and it's kind of like running up. And I think that's the wall for a lot of people, at least for me it was this underlying idea that like there's a place to get, and the shift is really recognizing more and more clearly that that isn't here now. Like you're always in the place that you're at, and there isn't some sort of idea of what that should be. And anytime there's an idea of that, like enlightenment, peace, like perpetual lack of suffering forever, and it's like it's not that either. And so any idea we settle upon isn't it. And so I think it's awesome to hear, and it's also just kind of inevitable to a degree that given our current mentality in society that people are going to get caught on that. So yeah, I mean, I resonate with you a ton, and we're so happy to have you involved in the conversation that we're having, because yeah, you always have so many insightful things to share, and it's clear that it's all coming from your experience and things that you've been through, which I think is the only place that those authentic insights can actually come from. So appreciate you for sure.
Yeah, I'm very excited that you're here, Tristin, because I know the first time that we spoke, you had called in and you had mentioned that you were a bit nervous to be talking to us, and yet you were so well spoken about what you were trying to communicate. So you definitely have a gift for communication. You've definitely shown that in a number of groups up until now. So I'm glad that you're here. I do have a couple of questions. You mentioned, of course, the needless conceptualism around spirituality and wanting to get beyond that. What exactly has been your experience in terms of spirituality? I know Andrew had his time with Dolores Cannon. I went through Christianity and Buddhism and Taoism, and I was a Wiccan for a little while and went darker than that. So I went down a number of different paths. What is it that eventually made you come to the point where you recognized you were just going in circles?
Well, if we're going to start from the beginning, I was in a Baptist preschool, which was quite interesting for just like a year or two I was in there. And then the next school that I went to was very Christian oriented, but my mom was more pagan, Wiccan. The rest of my family was. My grandma is a born again Christian. So it was just a mixture of belief. I mentioned before when I was like heavily into like the Wiccan pagan aspect, like, I don't know if I can believe this. My family was like, well, you got to believe in something. So I just was faced with so many obstacles with that because I didn't know what to believe. And is Jesus real? Does he really mean all these things that he said? And what is Christianity all about? So all these conflicting beliefs, and then being in a school that was primarily Christian as well, or just people that were mostly Christian talking about going to church school and all this on Sundays, it was difficult, especially when I had conflicting beliefs. And I had mentioned, like, oh, yeah, this is what I believe. And they're like, no, that's wrong. That's satanic. But it's just different. It was different. So I just flip flopped all over the place. And then I completely rebelled and was like, I don't believe in anything. I can't. I won't unless I see it and I believe it. So I really dove into science and used that as like based in reality. This is factual. This is true and tested. But spirituality and science go hand in hand. And especially with Eastern religion. So I dabbled in reading about that for a bit, but there was still a lot of conceptualization. There was still a lot of ego and do this and you'll get this result. But it's not a one size fits all for everybody in any group or any religion or any belief system. So lately I've just been peeling that all back. And when I dove into spirituality, it was more so like manifestation stuff. And I was like, holding on to these ideas. Why isn't this happening? Because I was trying to look for something, but it was already there. It was always there. But once I realized, oh, wow, I don't have to hold on to these expectations anymore, I could see that. It's like there was a curtain and the curtain was always dropped, but I thought that I was seeing the real thing. But then once it lifted, it was like, wow, there's so much more. There's a plethora of information. There's a plethora of knowledge. There's so much. But it was just me, that curtain, and me being all of these ideas. I chose to believe that, but I never had to. So it's just anytime you get caught up in shoulds or shouldn'ts or um, needs and wants, it really confuses the idea of the truth with untruth or reality and things that aren't real. So that's my experience with that. And then, of course, I came across Andrew and Ray and Dualistic Unity, and I was heavily into Dolores Cannon at one point, Teal Swan, Phil Good, um, lots of other names that I could list, but those were a lot of people that I had listened to. But there's truth laced in there. It's peppered, but it's mostly filled with ego as far as I'm concerned. So that's my experience.
Well said. And thank you. I appreciate the walk through the trajectory of your life in terms of exposure to different belief systems and whatnot. And I'm happy to hear, of course, that you've run across our good friend, Phil Goodlife, because we've referenced him a few times in the show. And I do hope that we can get him onto our Masters of the Metaphysical series that is going to be coming up in the near future. One thing he said, and I really enjoyed that, was you got to believe in something. And I've heard that myself a number of times. And isn't that funny? Because what they're really saying is you got to define yourself somehow, right? You have to have some idea of yourself. And that usually comes with what you believe. And that's really what they're saying. It's not even believe something, because they're happy if you quote unquote believe in science, which you shouldn't be believing in by any means. But even then, as long as you've got something, you're like, that's it. That's the truth. They're like, okay, that's all right. But to accept that you're completely uncertain really makes people uncomfortable.
Agreed. Oh my God. So many times I've told family members, like, I don't know what to believe. And they're like, but you have to. Why? What is that going to do for me? What if I realize that belief is conflicting? Then what is that going to do for me?
Exactly. That's what, and I said it this morning, but like that uncertainty is what allows your eyes to stay open and to continue to exist in reality. Like as soon as you're settling upon a belief, it's like, you got to settle upon an assumption. You got to make some shit up and sit on that. And it's basically just, you got to close your eyes to reality, because reality is never the thing that we think it is. It's never the belief. It's never the assumption that we're making. And so all of those things, that you walked us through in that journey, and mine, I would say mine's relatively similar in terms of like starting out religious. And a lot of people go that route, going through different spiritual concepts and ideas and all that stuff. And then, eventually recognizing that, oh, maybe none of these are it. None of them are the answer, because they're all rooted in the assumption of what you are. Like we're running around trying to figure it out while settling upon all of these assumptions of our idea of ourself. And as soon as that trigger happens, as soon as that comes into question, like what I think I am, and maybe that thought of what I am isn't the reality of what I am, it gets a lot tougher to go back to some sort of belief system, because that's kind of what's keeping those up, keeping them afloat, is those underlying assumptions about yourself and that desire to be certain about that. So I'm curious, in that process for you, going through all of those things, there's always like tones of questioning your idea of yourself, I think, as you're going through it, but it's never like that direct sort of thing, like I am never what I think. So I'm curious, in your experience, if there was, a specific situation that comes to mind when you're like, oh, maybe this whole idea of Tristin that I've been maintaining isn't the reality of what I am, or if it was more of like, the progressive sort of thing. And eventually it's always that progression as you continue to go through it. You're like, I'm not what I think, but I'm still holding on to a bunch of stuff, and that continues to get unraveled. But I'm curious if there's, one moment or a couple that really stick out to you in that experience of questioning your idea of Tristin.
I've had, I'd say, a mixture of both, honestly, because there was one moment, this was before I had even dabbled in psychedelics of any sort, but I was really high, smoking some weed, and I was chilling, just thinking, like, what is God? Like, what does this even mean? And I was like, what if every time that we think a thought, that's just us expanding upon that? And it just started from a source, and that was like the Big Bang, and it just expanded and expanded. I was like, oh my God, what if that was God? The more that I think and deviate from this, oh my God, that would be God because I'm questioning this. Oh my God. And I just went on with that for like 15 minutes. And I was like, but what if I'm never what I think any of this is? What even is this? So that was one instance. But then I kind of regressed back into the old ways of being, because we have that ebb and flow, teeter totter of experience. And then I really started questioning things more when I was suffering a lot. And I just kept peeling back the layers and realized, wow, like I did this to myself because of all these stories and these concepts. So let's dive into that. Let's do some shadow work, as the spiritual community calls it. But let's dive into that. Let's look at this and really see it for what it is. So I self analyzed and introspected, and then I realized I'm identifying as an introspective person that analyzes myself. So am I really that? So I had to just keep peeling back those layers, and it's been a progression. But I think it's just been all of my life has led me down this path because I was curious. So I wouldn't say there's a specific instance, but there are some moments that have stood out like sore thumbs. That could be like, yep, I could see why that had such an impact.
That's a good way of putting it. Kind of led by enthusiasm, curiosity. All of a sudden, you're willing to look because honestly, you have the intention to do so. And as we do that, of course, we go through the process of hearing all of the things that we do habitually tell ourselves, especially when we're going outside of our comfort zone. And so I wanted to bring up quickly that I know after we had spoken, a good portion of our community had voiced during a group call that Tristin should make content. If you're not already, you should be getting out there making content on TikTok. And I know you do that. And when you're going through the process of making content, immediately a lot of this habitual stuff about what we tell ourselves in terms of how good we are with people or communication or whether we're interesting or not or funny or any of that stuff comes up, and we have to push through it to make the content. So I've been wondering, how's that journey going for you?
It's been interesting because sometimes I'm like, I have something cool to post, and then I'm refining it, and I'm like, wait, that's so taking away from the message. So then I take a break. And then when something genuine comes up, I record it. And usually it's in like 1 or 2 takes because I want it to be as raw as possible. But I've I've really been struggling with that sometimes because I'm like, I know some people appreciate my insights, but what if I get backlash? What if I get hated on? So I try not to hold myself to such high standards, but when I feel that authentic insight come up, I'll either write it down or I'll record a video. I admit I don't post every day, but I'll post whenever I feel like it. And it's not always content about consciousness. I'll post whatever I feel like because that's all part of the journey. It doesn't have to be one specific niche because life isn't one niche in and of itself. It's a whole plethora of experiences.
Oh, absolutely. And that's really what it comes to, like where you're at now, recognizing you don't have to post anything specific. You don't have to post every day. You don't have to hold yourself to any, made up fucking bar of some expectation. Like that for me, I've been through, it's been almost 3 years now that I've been doing it. And that's really what I've come to. And one way or another, I've been through lots of periods where I'm like, I'm only going to post when I feel like it, no structure whatsoever. I've been through periods where I'm like, post every day for 6 months, do that. Been through periods where like, oh, I can only post this because this is what does better. And it's like, no, fuck that. I'm going to post whatever I want. And eventually, you come to a spot where it's like, this, in whatever way it means, it's something that is fulfilling to your life. It's not something that's taking away, because then it's like, what are we even doing here if it isn't just an expression of myself in whatever way that means? And that's what allows it to stay fresh, is not holding yourself up, not looking at other people's accounts and being like, trying to pull from what they're doing, or like, oh, they're doing this works for them. Like the best thing you can ever do, the thing that people gravitate towards, is you being you. And so that's incredible to hear. And I've been through a number of your videos and just really enjoy the authentic approach. And I think it's really important to maintain that as best you can. And I'll admit, like, I go through a bunch of takes sometimes when I'm like going through something. I'm like, oh, I want to, say it this way or that way. And eventually, usually to end it, it's just like, fuck it. And then I just post it anyway. So it's like at whatever point you get to that spot where you're like, fuck it, I'm just going to put it out there, is the spot that you eventually get to. So it's awesome to hear that you're, at that spot in your journey. But I'm curious, I guess, with the content, because I know for myself, just, and I don't know this with any degree of certainty, but if I hadn't started creating content and I just continued living my life how I lived it. Again, this like I can't even settle upon this certainty. I was gonna say that I wouldn't be where I'm at with insights and whatnot, but there is nothing saying that I wouldn't be. That said, I think it has helped me a lot. So I'm curious if what you've learned, if there's anything you can point to specifically, any insights, be it from the content you put out, the process of creating content that you have appreciated or learned or like has added to your journey of the willingness to question your idea of yourself, that you could share with us and our audience, especially maybe for those who are on the fence about posting content and they're like, oh, I don't think, it's not worth it. I can do all of this on my own. It's like, because I do think there's a great benefit to at least just curating a message in a way and putting it out there, whether your face is in the video or not, whether it's a voiceover, whether it's just text, like some sort of creative expression, I think is beneficial. So I'm curious what sort of insights you've derived from having that side of yourself expressed in a more public way.
Yeah, well, it might take me a minute to formulate this in a way that is, cohesive, but there's been a number of things I would say, because at first I would tell myself, I can't post content because that's not what I do. That's not who I am. But I was like, but am I? So I think just approaching it with curiosity and not really caring what other people think is a really important step that I've had to take, because I have a skin condition, so I've been very insecure about how I present myself and how I look. And I was like, "No, I don't want people to look at me a certain way." But I've also seen other content creators that post about their conditions vulnerably, and I appreciate that. So I realized, so it's not even that. I'm just telling myself these stories. So realizing that we're always telling ourselves stories and that not everything is what we think it is, and not everyone's perceiving us the way that we think they're perceiving us, has really been helpful in regards to posting content, but also through numerous areas of my life as a whole. I think that posting content has helped impact my day-to-day life as well too, because then I'm doing things that I'm uncomfortable doing, and then I realize that it's not so bad and I can do things that I'm uncomfortable doing in my day-to-day life. So then it bounces off of each other. And it's really interesting to see how that plays. And then when people are receptive to what you have to say, it's like, wow, so that was helpful. That was valuable, not just to me. It's not just something that I stumbled across and was like, oh, wow, this is interesting, but nobody's going to like it. It's no, this thing might provide some value, but it might not. But who's to say whether it will or won't? Whoever listens to it can take it as it resonates, but it's not my job. It's not my responsibility for people to be okay with what I post or what I say or even how I present myself in life. So I think just approaching things with curiosity, not holding yourself to strict, rigid guidelines, just letting yourself organically go through the process, however it works for you, is one of the biggest takeaways from posting content and just going about life that I could offer.
That's a great takeaway, I would say. And it applies to a lot of things in terms of it not being about the path. This is something that we tend to forget as we make progress along our own path through whatever experiences we take. It's really about the challenge. It's about going through the things that allow you to go, oh, that's something I think about. Oh, there's another thing I think about. Oh, there's another thing. And it's just whatever it is you're going through that gives you that opportunity. But typically we end up going through that and then we look back and we go, and that was necessary for everyone. It's like, not necessarily the case. Perhaps there are people out there who don't have anything to learn from social media, but they'll learn a lot from getting a job in the service industry. Right. And that's the whole thing. We have so many people who are like, oh, you have to learn yoga. You have to learn this deep breathing technique that I've learned in my path. It's like, no, that was just your challenge. That was the route that you took and decided to take something from. It's not that the path itself was valuable. It was your attention to the path that was valuable, because that's what we learn from. It's not ever the path. It's us on the path. It's our willingness to take something from the path. So the path is almost fucking irrelevant, which is why I've said many times in the past that you can sit in a cell by yourself and have all the insights in the universe available to you if you just had the will to look. Right? You don't have to learn any special kind of breathing technique. You don't have to learn a mantra. You don't have to be out there understanding chakras and all that other shit. You just don't. And most importantly, if you don't, nobody else does, which means that you don't have some magical fucking information that everybody needs, making you more important. Everybody has that potential. And it's in walking away from certain paths that we start to recognize the power was with us. So I love the way that you tackle social media, because it's the way that you should tackle everything. Everything should be done with that same level of curiosity and open mind, because everything is giving you the opportunity to see more of yourself, which is really all you need to do.
Agreed. And with the whole spiritual concepts and stuff, like people see it as these things that we need to hold on to, all these concepts and grand ideas. But like you were saying, it's about the journey, being on the path, and not necessarily identifying that this is the path that I'm on. Like, it's a path, it's what it is, you know? But if you're trying to look at it through a certain lens, you're going to see it through that lens. It's like putting on rose colored glasses. All you're going to see is a hue of pink around you. But same thing with spirituality. If you put on the spiritual glasses, you're going to look at things through spirituality. Oh, I'm feeling unsafe. Maybe my root chakra is unbalanced. Oh, I feel like I'm getting lots of insights. Wow, my crown chakra must really be active right now. I didn't speak my truth. Maybe my throat chakra's out of balance. No, it's just you're ascribing these details to it to make it fit your narrative. But that's not really what it is. It's the path, it's the journey, it's being open to what's here, because it's all accessible to you now, where you're at, as you're going along this journey. Even if you're thinking about your past, the present, or the future, it's all relative to this moment. So whether you have these grand insights through the lens of spirituality or, sports mindset or whatever else, everyone has different ways of looking at life, but that's what it's all about, just living. And another thing, the word spirit comes from the word breath. That's what it's derived from. So being in tune with your breath, and which is life, is the path. That is spirituality, the study of the breath, the study of life, being in tune with life and the journey.
I love that insight. And it's something I've meant to bring up before, that spirituality originally came from the breath, because there's a deep insight there, because oxygen, or air, our breathing, is quite literally our connection to everything around us. Like, we are inundated with reality itself. Our body has oxygen flying around all within it. If we didn't have it, we'd be toast. And so I've often said to Andrew, it's an interesting perspective between us breathing air, or air making sure we continue to keep going.
That's an interesting way to look at it.
Yeah, you almost see it from the perspective of the air being the thing that is connecting all of it. Like, we're breathing in and out, and like that breath that I'm breathing in is a breath you're breathing out and breathing in, and it's always that sort of dance. And it's like we just happen to be filling some of that air with body stuff as well, but like that's the interconnectivity. And it's funny because like that shift, and like even a recognition like that, like there's no teacher, there's no guru involved in that recognition, like the interconnectedness of the breath and breathing and whatnot. And so I think that's another one of the bigger shifts. Like you mentioned that, like Teal Swan, Phil Goodlife, Dolores Cannon, and all those people. And I think on the spiritual journey, like the process of letting go of that is the process of letting go of the irresponsibility that comes from passing that off to someone else, passing that off to a leader or a guide or a teacher or a guru. Like that is one of the bigger shifts, is in letting go of that idea of someone. And another one of those things, along with any of those people that I just mentioned, is the idea of God, the conceptual idea of Sky Daddy, a judgmental guy sitting up in the sky, looking down on you and telling you what's right and wrong and what you can and can't do. Like that is another way that we pass off that responsibility. And so it's interesting how much people will think that things are, fulfilling them, and really they're just passing off their responsibility for their own life, for being for being what is, for being reality, with no creator to meet, no one above to look up to necessarily, how big of an impact that has in letting go of that. And there's still, the back and forth, the desire sometimes to reach for something, but in knowing that that isn't it, like it's not about getting to any certain spot, like recognizing that as much as there is the perception of a path as you look back, like you're at the end of the road, you're at the forefront of reality in each and every moment. And so in your shifts out of spirituality, how was that in terms of letting go of the teachers and the gurus and people to look towards? And it's not to say, like, I still will check out like Krishnamurti, watch one of his videos here and there, or read some Alan Watts or something like that, but I do believe there's a shift in how you see them from someone that you're going to learn so much from, to someone who you appreciate what they've seen and the insights they've derived. And it's just like a little bit of a shift in that relationship. So I'm curious how you saw that relationship shift from, certain people that you looked up to seeing them more as, I guess, like an equal, in the sense that you are them. And if there are some that you still appreciate checking out for the insights that they offer, but not from a point of view of looking up necessarily.
That's a good question. I like that one. So there has been a lot of turbulence with letting that go, because for so long you place, like you said, that responsibility in their hands. Well, this person told me this thing, so it must be true. Like, because they're the teacher, they know things, but they're another person. Like you were saying, I see them more as equals instead of these figures. And especially with like religion and stuff too, like with Sky Daddy and all this stuff, it's seeing that it's through the perception of man's perception, humans' perceptions of this idea. So if we can see that it's always been through us, it's always been through our perspective, then it's easier to let that go. But I had a hard time grappling with that, because I personally would just put so much faith in these people, because I didn't want to take as much responsibility. I didn't want to have to look at things that made me uncomfortable. But it's really just been a process, because sometimes I would realize, oh, wow, this isn't it. They're not all that. They are just a person like me. But then I would go back to like, well, maybe they have something I could get, like that's important. Maybe they have something that would help. So it's a back and forth process, but I found myself letting go more and more and more as I've gone along. So I don't think I've had as tight of a grasp on it as I used to in the past, because I've been able to question things. But from time to time, I will watch a Teal Swan video and look for things that I find applicable to my life, but I don't ascribe to all of her ideas. Just like, oh, that's an interesting way to look at that. Okay, maybe that applies to my life. I didn't think of that question before. Maybe I can ask myself that. But I'm not a Teal Swanner. I'm not part of that community. I just appreciate some insights from people from time to time. And Sadhguru too. He has some interesting insights. I appreciate that. And then I like Joe Dispenza as well. He has some interesting things to talk about with frequency in the universe and with manifestation stuff, which there is some truth to it, but I don't see all of it as the truth. It's like I was mentioning before, it's peppered, it's layered in there. But it has been a bumpy ride, and that's all part of the journey. And I appreciate it. I appreciate the lows, I appreciate the highs, but sometimes it's a process. Sometimes it's hard. And spirituality and coming back to the moment isn't all butterflies and rainbows. It's life. It's raw. We're not designed to be happy. We're designed to exist, and we're designed to survive. But you can find happiness through that if you're willing to.
That's interesting. It's funny you mentioned Teal Swan and Joe Dispenza and Sadhguru, for example. I always think to myself, because often we're catching these people who are years in the game. They've been doing this for a while now. They've got a large audience, but they've been playing this game of being the quote unquote teacher or guru or whatnot for a while. And if they haven't been playing that game for a while, they've been on their path for a while, absorbing the concepts and whatnot for a while. So they're fairly familiar with whatever their shtick might be. And you can hear that, unfortunately. For me, I often hear how familiar they are with the things that they are saying. And as a result, I find there is a certain degree of passion and fire that is not there. And so often when I'm listening to these people, even Teal Swan, I think to myself, you must have been fun to talk to when you were like 20. Because you would have had an open mind to even get anywhere remotely close to these things. You know, another one I think about that with is Bashar. Every once in a while, I'll run across a video from Bashar, and sometimes it's okay. You're just like, yeah, all right, that's kind of useful. And then other times it's, you know, whales are dolphin oversouls, in which case you think to yourself, I'm sure that sounded good before it came out because it didn't sound good after the fact. But when they were younger, there would have been this curiosity, this enthusiasm, this intensity to question, because otherwise they wouldn't have gotten to anywhere remotely close to where they are in terms of their mentality. But there is always this feeling like somewhere along the line they just settled with the comfortable view that they had. And you know, to greater or lesser degrees, like Joe Dispenza, for example, seems like a really interesting person who lacks the opportunity to have a lot of really interesting conversations. I think he gets interviewed by a lot of people who have kind of a superficial understanding of what he's saying. And so he keeps the conversation relatively superficial. Like he was saying something the other day, like, you know, one thing I know for sure, it's all about the energy that you bring to the conversation. In which case I would have been like, what do you mean by energy? Let's talk about that. Where they were just saying, yeah, oh yeah, yeah, absolutely. Energy, really important. And it's just because they're trying to absorb the concepts. And so I think a lot of it is not just finding a way to engage in this stuff, but also just being willing to question yourself continuously. Like that word energy drives me nuts in the same way that telling people we're all one kind of drives me nuts, right? Because it's not quite the truth and it's so easy to misinterpret. So you have to be in there the whole time going, but don't take that as it sounds, right? Which makes the conversation grow if people are willing to let it grow. So I think it's interesting because in the process of you finding this new mentality, you're being the kind of person who's willing to have the conversation. You're being the kind of person who's willing to turn over every stone, as it were. But where do you think it becomes truly difficult to not just get stuck? Because this is something I've struggled with in the past in terms of quoting certain people, looking back at certain speakers, looking back at certain gurus and going, right, yeah, that. Oh, yeah. But what ends up happening to some degree is you end up becoming one of those people who says insightful things, and you become comfortable becoming one of those people who says insightful things. You actually aspire to be almost guru-like, despite the fact that the guru themselves is supposed to be telling you not to be one. So I'm curious as to how you look forward at your own path and whether you think that's going to be a temptation down the road, because you are very well spoken and it would be very easy for people to listen to you looking for an answer.
Yeah, I don't want people to believe everything I have to say because I used to be one of those people that would believe everything everyone else has to say. So it's hard to really define what has been or is still difficult for me. I'd probably say thinking that everything has a purpose. You know, that's an easy one to get caught up in because we don't know that, but by believing that, it makes it easier to deal with what you're dealing with if something is difficult. So it's just another lens to help you survive, to help you push through, to help you move forward. So it's hard to really define everything that I would say holds me back because there's blind spots all over. And, you know, we can't see them because we're not able to look at them. It's like a horse can only see, well, they can see a large amount of space. They can see so much, but they have a little bit of blind spot behind them. So even though you have your eyes wide open, there's always something that's eluding you. But if you're willing to question that, it makes it easier. So I'd say that there's still a number of things that I'm grappling with, of course, but I can't exactly pinpoint what it is until I'm like, oh, I've been telling myself that. I just realized I told myself that like 5 times today. So it's a process. It really is. And with the whole spiritual teacher thing as well, I have found myself caught up in those mentalities. And I have seen a continuity with their messages as well. Now that you mention it, like, yeah, if I listened to a Teal Swan video and it was like automated through some computer voice, I could probably be like, yeah, maybe that sounds like Teal Swan teachings, or that sounds like Sadhguru, because there's just a continuity to it. There's a certain amount of vocabulary that they use, the way that they flow with their words, and other things as well, concepts that they really settle upon. So I think that it's easy to get caught up in these ideas. It really is. And it can be just as easy to question them, and it can be hard to question them as well. It's just the willingness to be uncomfortable, really is the willingness to be uncomfortable. Because every time I settle into that discomfort, I realize more and more things about myself. Like, where I forget how the quote exactly goes, but your struggle, or the thing that you're fearful of looking at or that is difficult, is where you should be looking.
That's well said. I like that one a lot. Like those are the indications. And that's, when people will get caught and first kind of realizing that they don't have to chase a carrot or run from a stick. They're like, well, what do I do? Like there's nothing telling me what I should do. And I think that's a great way to look at it, even is well, what still makes you very uncomfortable? What are you still sort of resistant towards? What makes you feel a little bit uneasy? Like, go look into that. Work through those. Like it is almost a natural guide in a sense of those emotions that arise, those feelings, that resistance, that tendency to feel uncomfortable about a certain situation or thought. It's like, yeah, go follow that discomfort. It's telling you, what there's still things to work on. So I really appreciate that. And I liked what you said about purpose and trying to find a purpose. And it's interesting how we go through that process of wanting to find purpose in something, and all that is doing is taking away from the experience that we're having in the moment. Like, the purpose of the thing is to experience the thing. Like, the purpose of your life is you. The purpose is the experience that you're having. Like, as long as there's any additional purpose to the thing that you're doing, you're not fully involved in the thing. And yet we'll live our entire lives doing that, thinking that there's another reason that this is happening, because it gives us that sense of certainty. It gives us that false certainty to be like, oh, well, there's purpose to this. There's a reason that I'm going through this. And it's like, the reason you're going through it is you're just going through it. Like, you're just doing it. Like, can you become comfortable with that? Can you come to terms with that? Like, there isn't an additional thing, because anytime you settle on that additional thing, it's like you're not fully involved in the thing there. It's like the story of the archer, like half your attention on the prize, half your attention on the target. Only half your attention is on the target. Like, it's with anything. If you're trying to find some purpose or meaning regarding the thing that you're going through, all of your attention isn't on the thing that you're going through. And then it's going to prolong, if it's an uncomfortable or difficult situation, it's going to prolong that, because you're trying to figure out, what is this? What's going on? What's happening? What does this mean about me? It's like, there isn't any certainty you can find with that. The only thing you're ever going to do is settle upon an assumption as you're trying to find that purpose or reason for it. It's like, okay, I'm going through this, and this is why I'm going through this. Like, you don't fucking know that. You're just trying to feel a little bit more comfortable right now. That's all it is. And it's actually hindering your ability to fully learn from and garner what lessons and insights you could be garnering from the situation. So we're always kind of cutting ourselves off from the fullness of the experience, because we avoid that discomfort that comes from just recognizing that I don't know. And so with you going through things and being unsure of what pitfalls there may be, that's exactly the only way you can go through it rationally, logically, is like, I don't know where those will be, but I'm going to remain in that uncertainty, and they're going to come up for sure. Like, those who settle upon things, settle upon the idea that they do know, are just cutting themselves off from seeing it for what it is. And we're always doing that because we don't like that discomfort. But if you can continue going through that, like, you're able to actually fully experience life. So it's really the only option if you want to remain in reality is to remain in that state of uncertainty and be okay with not settling upon a reason for the thing or a purpose for why you're going through it. It's like you're going through it. Shut up and maybe you'll find out.
That's a really interesting point. Actually, I wanted to return quickly to this conversation we were having about the guru mentality and the danger of attaching to it. And I was thinking to myself, a really good way of keeping that in check might be to remember that you're not always going to be a guru, or maybe that you shouldn't always be a guru. Perhaps you shouldn't always be playing this role. Like for me, my perspective of whatever role I'm playing at any given time changes constantly. For a long time, I just took the role of being my own universe and I responded to my life accordingly. And then the conversation started to grow and I'm like, oh, okay, so now my role is to enjoy this conversation and enjoy it to the point where it's enthusiastic and curious and all of that stuff. And so I did that. And then along came Andrew, and Andrew was interested in the conversation. And so I'd answer a bunch of his questions. And then he went on to take those answers and turn them into bigger insights and then go on and talk to other people. So now I'm watching Andrew talking to other people. And immediately I'm thinking, oh, well, this is awesome. Because now I don't have to go out and talk to all of those people to involve them in the conversation. And so my role immediately starts to change. Now I'm starting to think, well, okay, I can back off here. Oh, I can go and do these things. I can go and do these things. I can go and check out these paths that I haven't looked at yet because I no longer have to play this role. And the reason is because I never got attached to it. I never got attached to it. I'm having this conversation because, frankly, it's a great conversation that I've never run into people wanting to have. So I've been enjoying it for its own sake. And then other people come over and they're enjoying it. So I don't have to be in there stoking the fire unless I value myself based on my ability to stoke that fire, based on my role within that group as the person who stokes the fire. Right. And that's where that danger lies. And so I think ultimately the path of any guru should be away from the role of teacher, which I find really funny because I started in a number of different jobs. I was a painter for a while. I've done construction. I've done sales. I've done all kinds of different things. And in that, the path was to get to a point where I didn't have a problem with any of that. And now I've gotten to a point where I don't have a problem with any of that. And I want to go back and do some of that shit.
That's really interesting. I honestly have also caught myself being in situations where it's like, I feel like I have to be the guru, I have to be the insightful person, but I've also felt like, well, maybe I want to learn something from somebody else. Maybe I don't need to be this person. But it's like whenever you go so far in one direction dramatically, it's like you kind of miss being on the other side of the spectrum because it's like I'm so used to this and I'm missing this now because that was an interesting part of my experience. But you don't always have to settle upon one thing or another. And just like gurus, they feel so much conviction in the message that they're portraying that they're like, well, I have to maintain this and because I'm getting money and fame. But then what if you wanted to take a step back? Would you be able to? No, you're afraid of the societal backlash, the social implications of that. But before, when you started talking about it, was it about the social implications? And so why is it now?
Well said. Yeah. And even with that, like, we're going down and sort of just to keep harping on gurus, like they get to a spot where they're comfortable and then they just settle. And it's like, do you know that's the best possible situation you could be in? Like, do you know if this is, your quote unquote ideal reality right now? And usually it's just in comparison to where they've been. A lot of people go through degrees of suffering and then, they get to a place where they're not suffering so much and they pass some of the responsibility onto certain things, whether they think, Jesus got him out of it or, a substance got him out of it or whatever. And so they're like, oh, this is it. This is the answer. I feel better than I used to. And that's it. And then they just stop. And then they build a whole business and persona around it. And then they just ride that off. And it's like, you think that's it? Like you're willing to settle upon that and pass on the process of finding out. And I think that is I hesitate to say things are, bummers and whatnot, but like it's kind of a bummer that we're at a spot in our society where just the cessation of suffering is enough for people to settle upon a certain idea, a certain belief, a certain thing. And it's like, I have no desire. Like it comes up for sure here and there where it's like, oh, feeling better now. Like this is kind of nice, but it's like that curiosity will always get to me. And it's like, this is none of this is what I think. So anything that I settle upon is just hindering my ability to continue to find out. And so it for me, it's that curiosity. Like, where does this go? Like, I know I'm not just Andrew. Like, I know that there is everything is pointing. It's quite obvious when you're willing to look and not be, uncomfortable about continuing to question and be uncertain about what you are, about what's happening here. And so it's like I'm very interested in seeing how this can shift, recognizing that it's all just me, like where this fucking situation goes. And so if I were to get to a spot where I was just feeling a little bit better than I used to, and then stop, it's like that's you're kind of throwing the towel in terms of the exploration of yourself. So is it for you? I'm just curious because for me, it's just like the curiosity of like, how fucking far does this rabbit hole go? Is that what keeps you going? Is it the recognition that, when you settle, you do begin to stagnate and eventually those old habits come up if you settle upon anything? Because that keeps me going as well, is just knowing what that side is like, knowing what the settling is like. So I don't know. I guess it's probably a combo for most people, but I'm curious what keeps you going with, your process of questioning, your willingness to remain uncertain and just continue to find out.
I'd say, yeah, the rabbit hole does go really deep, and when I settle upon things, it's just like you limit yourself and you're in a fishbowl in a sense, but it's like you're in a fishbowl, but there's another fishbowl, kind of like a Russian doll of fishbowls. But the more that you're willing to swim outside and be like, oh, I can peek my head out of this and see what it's about, it gets really interesting. But I've noticed I do have plateaus and I do settle upon certain things. I'm like, this is working for me. I'll stay here for a bit. And then suffering smacks me in the face again. And it's like, what are you doing? Question things because you're settling upon this and now you're not happy. Now you're stagnant and it's just murky water at this point. You got to clear that shit up, you know? But how do we do that? We question ourselves and it's hard. It really can be hard when you're so used to limiting yourself or defining yourself by certain beliefs. So for me, it really has been knowing that I'm not what I think I am. And if I think that I know something, I really know nothing because don't, we can't say that everything is what it is, even if there's like a consensus that says this is one way or another. Like we've been proven time and time again that beliefs that were widely accepted through a certain era have now been looked at as, ooh, yeah, that's not exactly okay. Maybe we should switch it up. So I don't think that even me talking about this and talking about these things is a concrete situation because it's always going to change. The insights that I have now are not the insights that I'm going to have later. And they're so much more open and not to keep harping on gurus, but they like when they settle upon this little box, they're only limited to this box of insights instead of stepping outside of it and seeing that there's more to it. So, really questioning everything has kept me going and realizing that suffering is a construct just as much as happiness is.
Well said. Absolutely. It dawns on me that we often have the conversation here on Dualistic Unity about identity, about the problem that we're all ultimately suffering through is the fiction of who we think we are. And a number of people have said, I've never heard it put this way before. And in my life, I have received a lot of backlash for attacking identity in the way that I do, in terms of it being a significant problem in terms of our mental health. But to me, it's the insight that makes all of the other insights have a foundation. All of a sudden, you're applying your other insights to a clear fiction. And that's what kind of helps you develop that sensitivity to when you're getting confused, is to know what's confusing you. And so to me, it's a really important insight. And the reason I get so excited by the community, and the reason I'm so excited to have you on the podcast today, Tristin, is that you get that insight and you're applying that insight as you move through your life. Same with Andrew. And so to me, I'm not the important part here. That insight is. However it's taken in, however it's applied, because the insight itself isn't even the important part. It's you being willing to look at it as a possible thing that's influencing you. And that's all. And so I love the fact that perhaps the reason identity isn't questioned by gurus is because to do so would be to question gurus.
Mm-hmm. Well said. Because that's an identity. And people also say, like, oh, ego, screw the ego, it's bad. The ego is literally Latin for I, for self. So if you're saying kill the ego, it's a bad thing. So everything, even your concept of the ego, even your bashing of the ego, is the ego. So if you're willing to see that ego, your identity, holding on to that is what is causing your suffering. It's not necessarily the ego itself, it's your ideas of the ego, this conceptualization, because it's not the concepts. Like you guys say a number of times, the description is not the described. It's not ever what you think it is. You can try to explain and summarize this beautiful sunset that you saw, but you're not going to be able to explain how the wind felt against your skin, how it smelled, how crisp the air was, the exact hue and the gradient in which the sky was painted. You won't be able to explain those things. You'll just say, I saw a beautiful sunset. Here's a picture. Oh, the picture is beautiful, but that's not even the reality of it either. It's all through how you perceive it and how you're willing to look at it while being grounded in this moment. It's all conceptual. It's all being tied back to you. And identity is the contributing factor to everything we suffer through and everything we experience. As long as you're willing to hold on to identity, you're holding on to an idea rather than you, the truth, what's really there, what's there when you're not identifying, what's there when you're not looking through these rose-colored glasses, what's there, your experience, your five senses, or any number of senses that you have access to. It's there. It's all in that.
Well said. And most importantly, what's not there? Religion.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Because that in and of itself is an idea. We make things religious to cope with our experience and to give it meaning, to say, well, this is God's plan. This is the universe's plan. It happened for a reason. How do you know that? Who told you that? Your mind told you that. You, some form of you, came up with that. And then you just passed it down because it seemed like a reasonable enough idea to pass along and to indoctrinate the masses. But that's not the truth. That's an idea.
Well said. And the insights just become more and more dead the more they get passed along. Because like as soon as they're even spoken, like they're dead. It's just like, or they're dying. It's like they're losing steam as they come out. So it's like, how close can you get to being alive, knowing that the words, the ideas, the concepts, the stories are never going to be the reality of it? But it's like, you push that on for 2,000 years. It's like, yeah, no, that shit's dead as fuck at this point. And we continue doing it because the alternative is to remain in reality and to remain uncertain. And so I was having a conversation just about, with a friend asking about the podcast, and he was asking if there's similar podcasts out there. Who would you guys compare yourself to? And I was like, honestly, like, not to sound like we're this crazy unique in a realm of our own, but like we are, because no one's talking about identity as directly as we are because of that because, you know, as a spiritual teacher, as a guru, you can't maintain that story legitimately and talk about it. Like you can't directly come at it because you're maintaining the idea of yourself as being a guru or a teacher or any of those things. And as long as you're maintaining that for yourself, like there's no way you can directly confront identity in that way. You have to be willing to let it go in and of yourself. And that's what people just aren't willing to do that. And so it's like, yeah, you can circle around it. You can make things sound real good, real nice. But unless you're willing to look at it and be like, yeah, no, that's the root. That's the issue right there is the conceptual ideas of ourselves. Like it's not it. And so, you know, we do our best to keep it fresh. And that's why it's the conversation is the most important component. It's you being willing to sit in that state and remain uncertain. And so it's really your willingness to remain in that state of uncertainty that keeps it fresh. Like it is a necessity to the conversation. And that's all it is. So,
but it can't be driven as a necessity. It has to come from that place of enthusiasm. It has to come from that place of curiosity. And I love the fact that we're using the words enthusiasm and curiosity because they really are drives that are without self-definition. It's not that you're curious or enthusiastic because it's going to make you more valuable. You are genuinely feeling your own will at play for its own sake. And what you're doing is its own reward. So you are totally involved with what you're doing. And we just tend to refer to it as enthusiasm or curiosity, right? But we know the feeling that we're trying to communicate here. We just have to use concepts to try and communicate it, which immediately devalues it. But what I find fascinating is the fact that that state of being that we're talking about, that enthusiastic curiosity, is the divine in action. It is the universe being itself joyfully. And yet enthusiasm and curiosity are the two things that religions basically just stamp out by giving you all these answers, all of this false certainty. And so taking you as far away from the reality of God as possible by killing it within you.
yeah, it's funny how, and even yesterday I was watching some sports and I was on an edible and like really, really high and just kind of like, I don't know, everything like there's very little perception of other people. Like it's all like I was watching it and I was just like, just the universe in action. And it was interesting how you can be like very sensitive to the ego taking as truth at play in those types of situations. Like people watching other people perform at something well. Like it was really like cut it down to what it was for me. And I was almost like starting to get confused watching it. Like it was starting to be very fascinating. Like why, like, because I've played sports my whole life and I never really questioned it in that way because I haven't seen things from the point of view that I see them from now for as long, certainly not when I was younger. And so it was interesting to see that play out. Like that's just God in action. And yet it's people are like cheering for one side or cheering for another or like appreciating this guy. He has like this story because he was an underdog and like people are rooting for him extra. And it's like just I don't know, it's like such an interesting play of things and like the seriousness with which people take certain things because they settle upon it meaning something about them. And it just comes back to them and their feelings and how they're, I don't know what basically like what they identify as, if they see themselves as identifying closer to one person over another, like they root for that person. And it's all just like, I don't know, it's just hitting me in a weird way that I just remembered that, you know, what you were just saying, right, kind of triggered that. But how interesting it is to see just the universe in action, just reality in action, so confused about what it actually is that we play these like games with ourselves. And I love playing sports and stuff, but like just the way that we've contorted it to be this thing like on its own, as opposed to just like enjoying the process of doing something that's interesting. So I don't know. I was just finding that very, very interesting yesterday, just seeing very clearly like that's God interacting with itself, so confused about what it actually is.
Yeah, because once again, the enthusiasm has been lost. This is a game that at one point we played. Now they're doing it for a certain paycheck, for a certain team that's worried about selling a certain amount of tickets and being able to use their branding to make more money. And so everything about the enthusiasm gets lost in terms of it being egotistical and a form of control. Now these players are judging themselves as better players because I get paid 20 million, you only get paid 2 million, blah, blah, blah. Why don't they all get paid the same fucking amount? Like they're all on the same team. One person on their own is goddamn useless, right? But the entire thing is distorted by ego, and that kills the enthusiasm in it. When originally it was just us playing, and that was its own reward. And now it's being able to lord it over the other team. We won. Your team sucks, that kind of thing. And that's it. It's a short egotistical payoff in the same way that religion has become a short egotistical payoff. And everything at the end of the day is a short egotistical payoff because it lacks that fire of genuine curiosity. Because it's not curiosity, it's need and desperation at the end of the day. And this is the problem with competition. There's nothing wrong with competition except that it's complete horseshit. Like, if you beat me in a race, that means nothing about you or me as a person, except that you're faster. But that's not how our society thinks of it. We put these people on a pedestal, and then we start to associate more value with them because they're on the pedestal. And then we feel less as a result. It's just because we get too involved with the mentality of division. There's nothing wrong with the experience of division. It's just that we take it as truth and we run with it. And it kills everything about life that we enjoyed as children.
Yeah, I do feel that curiosity and enthusiasm definitely does drive us. But if you're identifying with what that enthusiasm and curiosity brings, that's when you get that suffering. Because, like you were mentioning about sports, you're valuing yourself as this player that's in this position doing this thing, and you're really good at it. But there's always room for improvement. And there's always other people that are up and coming that are equally as good, but also have other things to bring to the table. We're all unique and we all have our own sets of values, but no one is more inherently valuable than another. It's just whether you perceive someone as having more value than you or not. That is really the driving factor there. And it all does come back to identity because it's how you're comparing yourself to somebody else. But we all start off as blank slates. We all start off with head empty, no thoughts, I guess you could say. But you're not what you think you are unless you tell yourself that you are that thing, in which you'll believe it. So then you act that way and you become it. But there's so much more beneath the surface.
Well said. Absolutely. Yeah. And it's just, it really has been fascinating me recently how something like, just to continue on with sports, like there's nothing objective about performance, as you were saying, like it's all in relativity. So someone doing quote unquote well or beating someone else, it's like we're using that as an excuse to feel better about ourselves. But there's nothing like that objectively exists in reality that's saying that your value now goes from here to here because of this event. Like it's all just excuses to feel better about ourselves. And like we take that, we use that to feel better about ourselves, and we pass off our ability to do that. We feel worse about ourselves if we don't meet some hypothetical bar and continue to perform to that degree. Like it's such an interesting way to spend eternity sitting in that spot of like, I can't feel okay until this happens. And now that it's happened, I do feel okay, but job's not finished, gotta go win it again next year. And it's just like this constant back and forth, up and down, like inability to recognize the reality of what you are because you're holding yourself up to this made up bar. Like it really is that. And depending on how you do, and then you got, I know plenty of kids who had parents. I was lucky enough to not have parents like this, but they were playing sports and their parents would like treat them a certain way depending on how they did or played, and like they would hold off on their love for them if they didn't play great, and like would give them more love and adoration if they did play well. And it's like, holy fuck, holy fuck, we've got confused. Like we are in such an interesting space that we actually put that much weight on an arbitrary situation that doesn't mean jack shit about your value. And we continue to push that. And like, just to see the insecurity play out in people that they can't feel a certain way or act a certain way or do a certain thing until they give themselves an excuse through performing well to do that thing or feel that way or accept themselves. And it's like you never get to that spot. There's no amount of games you win that becomes true. Like it's just pushing it off until it stops, I guess. And then when it stops, like if you're not playing anymore, then that's where you were driving your value from. Like, you feel valueless at that point. And you have an opportunity to question, maybe that's not where your value was derived from. But a lot of people don't do that. And it's not just sports, it's anything. It's performance in anything that we do these types of things that, we give ourselves an excuse to feel like we have value. And it's just, man, it's just fascinating to see it play out as often as it does. Like it is nonstop.
Because it's based on need, because it comes from a place where there is no sense of completion whatsoever. Because again, we've lost that curiosity and that enthusiasm. Religion plays the same part. You end up identifying with your religion and then judging everybody who doesn't believe as you do. So it's just another competition, except there's less sports at the end of the day. And it just comes down to enthusiasm and curiosity, which are basically the same thing. It's that fire that you feel when you are genuinely interested in your existence, not because you should be, not because everybody else says you should do it this way or because it's what they're doing, but because it's your existence. Nobody else is involved with this consideration. It's all about you, like it should be. That's the entire fucking point. So on that note, we're going to wrap up this episode very shortly. But Tristin, thank you, first of all, for being here today. I am so very grateful that you're part of the community, that you're out there in the world doing your thing, feeling this exact enthusiasm and curiosity that we're talking about, because that in itself is encouraging. That in itself makes me feel like there is another ripple out in the world, because there is, and you're obviously demonstrating it. I wanted to ask you a question before we part ways, which is, as you know, as you've communicated, occasionally we take ourselves a little too seriously. Occasionally we get wrapped up in our idea of ourselves, whether it be in sports, whether it be in religion, whether it be in school or our job or in our relationships with other people. We just get a little bit too caught up in ourselves and things become really stressful and dire. And there's that whole feeling of pressure. When you find yourself there, what would you say is your go-to insight or a go-to activity even to help take yourself a little less seriously, to take a little bit of the pressure off, to allow yourself the opening for that enthusiasm to come back into your day?
That's an interesting question, because I don't think I ascribe to one thing in particular. There's a bunch of things that I like to do. Like sometimes I'll just sit there and be like, okay, let's just take a moment and observe these thoughts and see what's going on. And then I'll see like a recurring pattern, like, that's it. Okay, let's look at that. And then I'll dive into that. But I don't try to look at it for an extensive period of time, because then I find myself really trying to micromanage myself. I just see it for what it is. Okay, that's nice. I'm glad that I got some clarity on that. Let's move on. Or I'll like write in my journal, and then I'll see what I'm thinking about, just letting myself feel my feelings and be there. Because sometimes like I'll feel a little like I'm feeling off right now. And sometimes it's just because I'm not caring for my body, and it's not necessarily because of what I'm going through, but it's a signal and it tells you like, oh, I'm grumpy. And then you get caught in this idea of like, grumpiness or feeling hangry or whatever else you're going through. But then you address the symptom and then you can get yourself back to baseline. And also, like, I also do some like what is it called, like regulation for your sympathetic nervous system. I posted about this on my TikTok, but there's this thing where you can, like, you turn your head slightly to the side, like for about 30 reps, you can feel like a little bit of tingliness in yourself, where you feel like you have to breathe. And then it actually helps reset your nervous system. You do the same thing with like tilting your head a little bit left and right, and it helps reset you. And I was like, and I felt myself come back to baseline. And I was calm, euphoric, peaceful. Wow, that really does work. Okay. So coming back to my body, coming back to the moment really, really helps, because really that's all that we're trying to do. That's all that spirituality or any teaching is ever pointing to, is enjoying where you're at, coming back to the moment. So I try to utilize the present and really embodying myself and where I'm at as much as possible in order to come back, in order to realize that this is it, because that's all it ever is.
Fuck yeah. That was a beautiful answer. That was so well said, because that's all it is recognizing the uncertainty of the reality of the situation and paying attention. Like that's pretty much my go-to is, I don't know, shut up, pay attention. Like that. And whatever means you can utilize to get to that spot is it. And it's going to be different for everyone. And whatever works for you, it's all coming back to the same recognition. Pay attention. You don't know. So, Tristin, so well said. I really appreciate everything you had to offer, all of the insights that you share, be it on this episode or in any of our group chats or on Discord. It's always awesome to hear from you. You got so much to share with all of us, and I look forward to our next chat.
As do I. It's always a pleasure. Always a pleasure to talk to you guys and just to be here and exist at the same time. And the mere coincidence it was to stumble across your page and just be able to immerse myself in this community, in this space. I'm just really grateful to be here and speak with you guys.
Likewise. Likewise. Absolutely. Well, thank you everyone for tuning in to this episode. I'm so excited to talk to all of you as we move forward, whether it be in a group or on an episode or a roundtable or on Discord. Just connect with us, because really, it's not even about the conversation so much as the curiosity and the intention behind that conversation. And so we're very grateful that you joined us. Tristin, thank you so much, man. And have a great one, everyone.
Bye, everyone.
Bye.